Good afternoon, everybody. This is Shane Sparagowski, the upcoming chair of the Emerging Technology Caucus, and we're here at the Crisis Technology Center. I've got Joseph Porcelli here with Nextdoor, a really dynamic website that you can engage your residents on, and he's going to be talking about increasing resiliency using polls and other tools from Nextdoor. Joseph?
Great. Thanks for having me here. Good afternoon, everyone. I thought I was stepping on the wire. Apparently I'm not. Thanks. So thanks for having me. I'm going to do just a quick overview of what Nextdoor is for those of you who may not be familiar with it, and then I'm going to jump into some polls and show some real live examples and talk about some of the thinking behind how this works and actually how it's moving the preparedness needle for folks. So if you're just tuning in, again, my name is Joseph Porcelli. I'm a public agency lead for Nextdoor. And I actually have a bit of experience working with government. Used to work for Boston Police at the Neighborhood Watch Unit, and then served as the first community engagement strategist for Homeland Security, and then stood up community.fema.gov, which is now like their Preparathon site. So a little bit of background to some of the things I'll share with you here. So I am a recovering community organizer, and I'm suffering from post-community meeting stress disorder. For those of you who have chuckled, you know how much fun that can be, and it's a really important thing to do, but how do you scale that process, right? How do you get people who aren't paying attention, who aren't coming to community meetings, who maybe aren't following you on other social channels to pay attention and change some behaviors to make their communities, their neighborhoods, their communities more prepared? And a place to listen to is where the role that Nextdoor plays, and that's what we help make happen at scale. So some other background, when we first started doing research about the company in 2011, we found that most neighbors didn't know each other's names, and they didn't know any of their neighbors, and we wanted to change that. So when we looked at the social sphere, basically we looked at, there was Facebook connecting friends and family, Twitter you can follow anyone around the world, and LinkedIn was great for connecting to professionals in your network, but there really wasn't a social network for neighborhoods, and that's the space where we fill out. And so Nextdoor is the private social network for neighborhoods. And what Nextdoor does best is it brings neighbors together. So the woman in the middle of this picture here is a lead. She started Nextdoor in her neighborhood in Washington, D.C. And other than her family members, she didn't know any of her neighbors. And so this helped her and all her neighbors come together. And they use Nextdoor for all kinds of things, from talking about welcoming new families to the neighborhood, buying and selling things, getting recommendations for babysitters, organizing to shovel out their neighbors who are elder during snowstorms, and helping each other out. Nextdoor is currently available in about 86% of neighborhoods in the United States. We're also operate in Europe and 6 other countries, so we're expanding. And some things that make Nextdoor unique is that every Nextdoor neighborhood is started by someone like the woman in the middle, Sayat, and every person needs to verify their address before they gain access. That happens through a postcard going to their home, and there's a little digit at the bottom, and then people can punch that into the website. Or you can also verify by phone, which most people do. So residents are already using Nextdoor, and one of the things that I've been talking to folks about here is it's a built-in audience for government. There's 2 platforms. There's the residential side, and there's Nextdoor for public agencies, which I'll start talking about in a couple minutes. And when we're connected to our neighbors, we can do things for each other. I always sneak a picture of my daughter in all my presentations. So now that it's fall, I will post on Nextdoor in my neighborhood and say, if you're not able to physically rake your leaves, I will come by and do it for you. And I bring my daughter, and we have a little play day, and I post, and other people find out. So my other neighbor came to join us. And then people also post, ask for help, and we organize things. At our core, that creates resilience because we're identifying neighbors who are vulnerable, who are going to need other help. And those relationships and ties play out. So every time there's a massive snowstorm, I actually keep a little map of all the neighbors I rake leaves for or mow lawns for in the summer, and I just go automatically shovel them. And I'll post, like, going to be shoveling for the next 4 hours, who wants to come with me? And that way I have someone to join me at the bar afterwards when I'm done. Anyway, long story. So during disasters and emergencies, Nextdoor plays a vital role because people who need help can ask for help, right? And that decreases the burden on emergency managers. And what we saw, for example, during Harvey is neighbors were literally posting, I'm going to drown, and other neighbors came by and saved their lives, which is really cool. And from the public agency side with Nextdoor for public agencies, we had partners posting all kinds of messages all over the greater Houston area, and we saw the same thing happening with Florence. We saw the same thing with Gordon, and recently with Michael. So this access allows agencies to communicate with folks during emergencies. Now, I'm going to jump out of my presentation and show you a couple accounts, and I'm going to start talking about polling. Before I go, is there any questions? Did anybody have a question about what I just spoke about? Okay, cool. So this is Will County, Illinois, and they use Nextdoor for all kinds of communications, but they were also one of our partners who did a ton of polls, and Mary Jo and Jennifer helped create a series of polls that specifically measures protective actions that we want people to take that are written out in like real English. So let me scroll down here and show you a couple of those. Let's see. Actually, this one's really neat. The wireless emergency test. This is an assessment of what, did people participate in this? They asked, did you get the test? And 1,640 people responded. 16% of people said no. That's real solid data, right? And actually partners across the country did this. And we were just talking about this the other day, statistical relevance. That is statistically relevant for this area. But these are what do you call it, determined or self-selected folks. So you've got to keep that into consideration, but this is pretty cool. So that's sort of the general functionality. But here, coming into some of the specific questions is, do you have enough money saved up that you could use for a disaster? And here, the results were 45% of people said they did not. Now, that's not too surprising, right? But this is the interesting thing here is there's a conversation. So there was 11,000 people that saw this poll, right? That's a whole bunch of folks. This took Allison maybe 10 minutes to post this because we wrote it. Thank you very much again. But that is a conversation at scale that makes people think, right? And there's incremental ways you can save money, whether it's a dime a week or $1 a month or $10 a week, depending on where you are. But it makes people think about the importance of this. And then you have some of that sort of social proof in the conversation that all the neighbors have about this. Because, if you remember back in like 2014 under PPD 8 or whatever that was, there was a study about messaging for preparedness. And if it comes from an authority, it's not as well received as hearing it from a peer, right? So that's helpful. Okay. Couple other examples here. Have you identified more than one way out of your neighborhood? And again, these are the kinds of questions, these are the things you want your neighbors to think about, right? And here, 26% of people did not. Now, maybe you live on a peninsula like I do, and I know two ways, and the boat, right? But I also know that there's a little walking bridge, but as long as the water doesn't get too high, I live in Annapolis. But it also made me think about this, right? These are not complicated questions, and the dialogue, again, between neighbors helps lift the needle. Joe Corona, who's here from Montgomery County, did a poll a year ago and then just did the same poll again and demonstrated that 10% more people said they were prepared than the same time last year. And they've also done a series of polls, which has been really helpful. So I wanted to make that point kind of early on in the presentation because I got another, 3 hours to talk? Yeah. Yeah, my mom will be listening, I hope. Anyway, so the thing is, there's evidence that this works, right? We're starting to see that this is not just a good idea, that it's driving conversation, but we can measure, because if you ask the same question again, you ask the question, do a series of messaging, talk about the importance, neighbors talk to each other, learn from each other, you can demonstrate that it's working, which I think is really, really powerful. So another way to look at that is they asked this question, since participating, do you feel more prepared? And 80 people said yes, and they posted 10 polls. That's significant, right? So imagine if all emergency management agencies in the country did this. They did those series of polls. They drove that conversation between members. They asked this question. I think we're moving the needle, right? The data says that we are. And I think because this is such a basic way to engage people, it works. But it's also fun, right? Like preparedness messaging isn't always that great. But the more personal kind of questions and answers that people have with each other work. Let's take a look at a couple more examples. Do you have out-of-state contacts? 34% of people didn't. Okay. Now, the other thing that you can do with polls, which is really cool, is you can actually, depending on how you have your account set up, you can download them just by the Nextdoor neighborhoods. And so Will County has like 400 and some, and you can see how each neighborhood did. You can map that against your census data and look to see, like, maybe we need to spend some more time on the ground there, or maybe there's something else going on that we haven't determined that we should look at. But you can also do this if you're a larger county by giving us all your towns as shapefiles, and you can see how each town did. In fact, I think today the Maryland Insurance Administration released poll data that we did assessing whether Marylanders understood that their homeowners insurance policy did not cover flooding, and it turns out that 18% of the 3,000 people who responded did not. So that's fairly significant, right? And we can look at that. We broke that down by county, and they'll be doing more events in certain counties where it didn't perform as well. So this is a way to assess. This is a way to educate, but it's also a way to help dictate where you might put some more of your outreach efforts. How am I doing on time? Okay, cool. Any questions? All right, I'll take that as I'm doing a great job. Thank you. So this was a Mary Jo question. I remember this when we were going back and forth for a little bit. But do you have 1 gallon of water per person in your home for at least 3 days? And we know that some of this may change. But how do you think folks did? Better or worse? Guess from the crowd? So 52% of people said nope. I was just meeting with New Hampshire Emergency Management last week, and this is one of their biggest concerns. There was a town just south of Nashua, New Hampshire. They lost power like a year ago, and I guess 6 hours after they lost power, people were freaking out and calling 911 because they didn't have water. And thanks to you, I have one of those giant gallon thingies now. Appreciate the tip. All right. Are you able to make at least 3 days worth of meals without having to rely on refrigerated or frozen food? The answer for me is no, but 48% of people felt the same way, right? So these are the kinds of questions, these are the things that if more and more people did, it would allow you to respond to more acute needs, right? If we raise that awareness level, and for the people that are really prepared, they'll be able to help some of their neighbors who are not, which I think is super helpful. For Joe, Mary Jo, anybody else, am I missing anything? Is there a point here that you feel I didn't cover? Or does anybody want to come up and say anything from their experience? Yep. Please.
So I'll add one thing just about writing these polls. One of the things we did as we were discussing this is we wanted to give people very practical understandings of why we were asking these questions. That's why you see this question written this way. Do you have 3 days worth of meals? Instead of asking, do you have a 7-day food supply kit? People don't think about that, but they could go in their cabinet, say, well, yeah, I could eat cereal for several meals, and then I could probably make do with X, Y, and Z. And so a lot of times our national preparedness questions aren't written the way people think or people act. And so we tried to work on that, and it's something to consider for polling.
Here you go, Joe, and just introduce yourself, too.
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Corona. I am the Montgomery County Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. I'm the outreach coordinator for the county. One thing that I do want to recommend is those shapefiles. He briefly mentioned the shapefiles that you can send to Nextdoor. You can create them based on your hurricane evacuation zones and really tailor your polls to specific areas so that they know exactly what zone that they're in. You can send those polls to specific communities. And so it's very important to get that information, that very specific information, to a specific community and get that information directly to them.
Any other partners want to share any insights on that? Mary Jo, cool. So a couple things to note. We're here at booth 823 if you want to swing by. My colleague Amos is there right now. You can follow me on Twitter as @JosephPorcelli, and the hashtag we use for this is NextdoorGov. And then following this, I'm actually going to tweet out the Google Doc we've been working on forever, the new updated version for 2018. So thanks for having me. This has been an honor.